Good evening, everyone. I'm Savannah Hicks with the University of Arizona Press. Welcome to our event, Latinx Pop Culture Presents Undocumented with John-Michael Rivera. The University of Arizona Press is the premier publisher of academic, regional, and literary works in the state of Arizona. We disseminate ideas and knowledge of lasting value that enrich understanding, inspire curiosity, and enlighten readers. We advance the University of Arizona's mission by connecting scholarship and creative expression to readers worldwide. Founded in 1959, the press is a nonprofit publisher of scholarly and regional books. We publish about 55 books annually and have more than 1,600 books in print. These include scholarly titles in anthropology, archaeology, environmental science, history, indigenous studies, Latinx studies, Latin American studies, and the space sciences, as well as award-winning fiction and poetry series Sun Tracks and Camino del Sol. Employing a broad range of writing genres and scholarly approaches, Undocumented catalogs, recovers, and erases documents and images by and about peoples of Greater Mexico from roughly the first colonial moment. This brave, embracing volume organizes and documents ancient New World Mexican peoples from the Florentine Codex from 1592 to our current technology-heavy age, wherein modern lawmakers and powerful global figures desire to classify, deport, and erase immigrants and their experiences. Undocumented is part of our Latinx Pop Culture Series, edited by Frederick Luis Aldama and Arturo J. Aldama. Frederick Luis Aldama is University Distinguished Professor, Arts and Humanities Distinguished Professor of English, University Distinguished Scholar, and Alumni Distinguished Teacher at The Ohio State University. He's the 2018 recipient of the Rhoda C. Bodeman Award for Distinguished Teaching and Mentoring and the Susan M. Hartman Mentoring and Leadership Award. He's also the award-winning author, co-author, and editor of more than 40 books. In 2018, his Latinx Superheroes in Mainstream Comics won the International Latino Book Award and the Eisner Award for Best Scholarly Work. He's editor and co-editor of 8 academic press book series, as well as editor of Latinographics, a trade press series that publishes Latinx graphic fiction and nonfiction. His other University of Arizona Press books include Decolonizing Latinx Masculinities, Latinx Cine in the 21st Century, Long Stories Cut Short, and Real Latinxes. John-Michael Rivera is an associate professor and writer at the University of Colorado Boulder, where he serves as director of the program for writing and rhetoric. He's published memoir, creative nonfiction, poetry, and scholarship. He's the curator of El Laboratorio, a literary space for Latinx writers, and was the co-founder of Shadowbox Magazine, a literary journal for creative nonfiction. Please welcome Frederick Luis Aldama and John-Michael Rivera.
Yay, thank you, Savannah. And I had no idea you were going to introduce me as well, but thank you for that. That's so cool. It is my honor, my great honor, to have as my guest the extraordinary Latinx scholar and creative force that is John-Michael Rivera. We've already heard a little bit about what John-Michael Rivera does when he's not writing his books. So I'm going to share just a little bit of my enthusiasm for this when it came to me. First, Norma Cantu, I have to say, just beautiful kind of description of this book as a tour de force that breaks rules and creates new ones. She adds how this your use, John-Michael, of true mestizaje of genre and approaches cooks up a rich poetic stew that is stimulating, intriguing, and nourishing. I love that. So much that comes at us is just like popcorn, right? So much of the stuff that is thrown at us, and your work is real food. William Nericho, who's part of the audience with us right now, writes Undocumented is a magnum opus that delves into the bordered, unconscious, a militarized and surveilled zone between nations and languages. When I first encountered the first 100 or so pages of this extraordinary book, I immediately thought Anzaldua's Borderlands, Bill Nericho's Tex-Mex, Alberto Ledesma's Diary of a Reluctant Dreamer, Teresa Hyung Cha's Dictée, and Audre Lorde's Zami. Today, as a wondrous, critical, creative object in the world, the power of Undocumented can be fully apprehended. Here, John-Michael brings scholarly rigor to sociopolitical, historical, and epistemological issues in the recovery and erasure of documents and images by and about peoples of Greater Mexico. Here, John-Michael opens portals into the deep recesses of our cognitive and emotive makeup. He invites us to transform. Please join me in welcoming John-Michael Rivera. Please welcome John-Michael Rivera, who's going to read a little bit from his book, and then we will go into Q&A.
Thank you, Frederick. Really, thank you very much. I owe you a lot, and your brother Arturo a lot. I sent this manuscript or pieces of this manuscript to you years, probably I guess a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Something I've been working with for quite a while, and I didn't think I wasn't even sure I was going to publish it. To be honest, I was just doing a lot of writing, and it just started kind of coming together slowly. You know, I had to travel to Italy a few times to work on the manuscript, the Florentine Codex, and twice I had to do that because the first time I went, one of the books wasn't there. It happened to be in New Mexico when I was there in Italy. So yeah, so I really thank you so much. Thank the University of Arizona Press. They did such an amazing job with this. They actually embossed it. It's beautiful. I mean, it's an absolutely beautiful text, and I couldn't be happier with the work they did. Kristen and Matt and Madi and Sarah and Abby, everyone just did amazing work, and I really, really appreciate it. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the book and the process. So I'm just going to get in, and what I'm going to do today is just kind of read sections of the book to kind of give you flavors of it, but also more specifically focused towards the, I guess you could say, the non-scholarly parts of it. It's it's about 302 pages. So it does a lot. There's almost 50 images in the text. And but let me just begin, and I'll read for a little bit, and then we can kind of talk about it if we can. 52 keys form the alphabet beneath my fingers. Sequential punches illuminate the words hidden within the frame. An unnatural union of brain to inanimate touch marks this delicate relationship between my hand and the lettered gray keys. Perfectly squared black pixels frame the outline of knowledge. Information flows from mind to plastic, to sand, to flesh, to paper, to another body, to another eye that gazes upon the page in a world made anew with every entry. The touch of knowledge feels cold, feels dead. A ghost in the machine speaks. How do you document the undocumented? This inquiry, manically repeated over and over, belies the effectual relations that inscribe a ghostly demarcation. Undocumented, a word that simultaneously documents, inscribes, and erases. It creates a condition somewhere between the living and the dead, a spectral speechax that reveals the anxious feeling of being Latinx since the 16th century. To document the undocumented, to undocument the documented, haunts Latinx existence. This inquiry bespeaks a spectral Latinx subject rendered by the shadow of the state, cast and collected by a parchment doppelganger that leaves us split between paper and flesh. This action, this in-between being and non-being, this is the state of the subject, a mechanism of the state, the logic of our modern information culture, of my anxious age of documentality. There is an irony buried here within this period of hypervisibility. Now, when everything is being cataloged and systematized and more documents are being created than any other period in history, we are left with this anxious feeling of being perpetually revenant. Documented subjects of the nation state feel and are rendered like ghosts, an absent presence within their own home, a living dead subject haunting a nation state where documents turn paper to flesh, flesh to paper. And yet, to ask this question, how do you document the undocumented, is both emancipating and repressive. It leaves the subject searching for a mooring that will tether their bodies to a state whose documents write and erase them, a phantasmal logic of necropolitics. We are all created in and out of existence, moment to moment, year to year, decade to decade, century to century, with the stroke of a pen, the touch of a keyboard. So I want to begin, and in each book, the book is divided into 12 books. And in the beginning of each book are these, I guess you could say, poems that are based upon the long prefaces that Sahagún wrote. And this is the only part in the entire encyclopedia where Sahagún, who I guess you could say compiled the Florentine Codex, along with the other Mexica flower writers, if you will, where you start seeing his embellishment. So I basically kind of took his language and constrained myself to write these poems in between, and each poem serves as kind of a metaphor and epigraph of that particular chapter. This is from Book 2, Ceremonies. All writers authenticate. I know they made truth in these books. It was done this way. Grammarians employed in ancient times conferred many days. They, I, explained language, and I, writing the explanation, painting lost originals. I still have the originals. This is from that same section. It's called Exile, from Texas to California in 1973. From a distance, El Campo, Texas looks as if the earth had finally swallowed it up. 70 miles from civilization, a coastal town suffocates under the poisonous ropes of yellow-tinged hyacinths and tallow trees. The backdrop reveals smoke billowing from a nearby bay, rising until the coastal breeze pushes it into the lungs of Palacios. From there, rice and cotton fields march with bodies on the edge to the edge of the parking lot. Manicured earth gives way to a dilapidated American Legion dance hall called La Mangrovia. On Mexican Sundays, we stood alone, as many as on the far side of town, in an undocumented sanctuary unsanctioned by the church. Smoke covers the setting sun's partial light just long enough to see the faded facade that once welcomed hundreds of documented and undocumented alike. Now layers of dust and dirt slowly eat away the siding, once smooth and red as the surrounding earth. Upon this pocked, blood-stained skin, graffiti conjoins with and mocks a mural of two dancing ghosts held in suspended relief. Deserted now by those who slowly tear down its stucco skeleton, with every passing day they learn to forget their past. No documents remain. What is left is a cracked marquee, now only partially visible, specters left behind in their memory. Lying back towards the sky, windshield framing gray heaven above, too fast to see it clear. 4 years old, small enough to fit on the Malibu dashboard. A journey carried by a car colored by dusted sage, steering westward through the desert, searching. It looks like he tastes the muddy color on his lips, muted brown swirls on his puckered tongue, already starting to desensitize to Mexican flavors. His green eyes blind to their touch, excuse me, overwhelmed by their vivid surroundings. For 1,000 miles, terra incognita. Was this the moment he learned about panic? The wind through the black asphalt roads now flecked by the dust of the travelers, their voyage to the other side of, now fixating on the outline of his mother's head. It looks like the broken dust has gathered in the crevices around their bodies. Small mountains outline them. He embraces it. He touches fine red, brown powder, white crystals speckled with age, like rock salt, the flavor of those mountains, of earth, of tomorrow. Conjunto. Those summers I returned, I never danced, just stood listening near the stage, an outsider now, knowing no comfort and staring at their final passing, quickening thoughts of them as ghostly echoes, now finding their rhythms as silhouettes in the empty American Legion dance hall in El Campo in 1976, erased words buried within unrelenting dreams, now heard over and over, the station music now haunting. The voyeur turns inward through sound, finally learning to embrace the melodic cacophony of now dead voices that once surrounded him through them. I heard others from the procession, too pulsing two pulsing two-part beats, and a cordonista dancing with the bajo sexto, rising with harmony of mourners who silence their tears with the crackling of gritos from bodies, swaying black back and forth, boots clacking on the floor, touching and creating a resonating, haunting tone with lyrics that find their meaning in our loss. Even now, I hear them when I close my eyes, matching the beat of a heart skipping to the beat of an anxiety created from loss. I am left with sonic vibrations that form archives echoing the past. And then what happens in this particular text is it goes into archives of the first works that were coming out of this particular space in El Campo, Texas, and I give you the different documents that I found. This is from a later section. It's called La Brea's Ghost. I encountered my first ghost when I was 12. It was on a field trip to the Brea Tar Pits. Once a Mexican land grant before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848, Rancho La Brea is where I found the Brea woman, the only human to be recovered from what is now named La Brea Tar Pits. A young woman believed to be between 18 and 25 years old. La Brea woman lived around 9,000 years ago, exhumed from the tar in 1914. Her remains consist of a cranium, a mandible, a postcranial fragments recovered from pit 10. The guide tells us she was murdered with a fractured skull and broken jaw resulting from a hit from a blunt object. The exhibit was very expensive. She is in a the exhibit was very expensive. Look how lifelike it is, the director says. I stare at the life-size specter of her body. She is in a light box display that creates a phantasmic hologram, highlighting her upward skeleton with the use of special effects lighting. Artificial muscles, skin, and hair appear on her bones to reveal what she looked like in real life. Her death chamber shines in my mind's eye in perpetuity. 35 years later, I see the stereoscopic specter. I wonder now, was she the first victim of an undocumented act of misogyny? Curated femicide haunts forever. I return in 2015 only to find out that the exhibit was removed around 2004. The director of the museum, John Harris, feared retribution from Mexicans and Native American activists who may want her remains and who desired to declare the pit a sacred burial ground and resurrect the Native and Mexican past of Rancho La Brea. Some believe there were more Native American bodies in the tar pits and the museum was hiding them. La Brea woman is now entombed in a large paper box in an out-of-sight storage unit. A documented ghost far too material, far too visible for a city that buries its Native and Mexican past in cast celluloid. This is from book 5, one of the prelude poems again. Dark night, wanting to investigate, we seek secret things, paths forbidden, cries of the living. We search for apparitions in the fragrance of things, in auguries placed here. "150 years later, the origins of the Mexican question haunt me at night. Just to recall, I talked about this earlier, the Mexican question is a term that was used by John O. Sullivan, the same person who coined the term manifest destiny. Okay, so this kind of chapter kind of explores this idea of Mexican question, and I'm kind of embodying it, if you will. Perhaps watching Alex Rivera's Sleep Dealer too often, or a new dose of Lexapro, leads me to have vivid dreams every night for a week while I apply to become a census taker for the 2020 census. I tried to get such a job 10 years ago, but wasn't chosen. I am hoping to work in the neighborhoods where Latinxs, with the new SCOTUS decision, are at the risk of being erased with new questions about their citizenship and race. The dream repeats itself in parts over a week while I wait for the interview. Though fleeting and partial, in every version of this dream, I am a census taker in some near future, and the skin of my entire body is translucent, like onion skin paper. Just under my epidermis lies a digitized map that warms my skin and yet is cold to the touch. Every morning before I begin my task of going door to door to ask questions, I stare at a mirror, naked, and the map coordinates light up orange, yellow, green, and red just under my skin, which glows a blue hue. I try to rub it off my body, but my mind is distracted and taken over by echoing questions, layered upon questions entering my head from someplace I think is on my body. What is your name? Who are you? Where do you come from? Are you a citizen? In the next moment, I am taken to an apartment complex where my mom and I lived when we moved from Texas, the place in LA, where as a young boy, I met a librarian who introduced me to the archives and the Florentine Codex. I am then going door to door asking questions. What is your name? Where do you come from? Are you a citizen? Their answers mark my body, and the map inscribes or erases them with each answer. Most disappear after the last question. I come to a door and a young boy opens. It is me as a young boy. And strangely, not shocked by my younger doppelganger, I ask the same question. Who are you? Possession. Everyone wants to possess the undocumented for profit, to inhabit the skin of the dead bodies as if they were a fashion accessory gilded with guilt upon their living bodies. In 2014, a reality show was produced to highlight 6 average Americans who are confronted with the realities of immigration while retracing the footsteps of dead border runners. The first episode shows them going to the morgue to pick out their corpse they will be assigned to follow. They rummage through the belongings and documents, and the host proclaims, "We've given them a name. You must give them a story." And an undocumented amazing race ensues with the course of 6 episodes that play out on Al Jazeera at midnight. In 2017, Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu directs and produces the VR film Flesh and Sand and presents it at the Cannes Film Festival. The film places the viewer among a group of immigrants who are led by a coyote across the Mexican border into the United States until they are stopped by the Border Patrol. According to the director, no experience in carne y arena will never be the same from any visitor. We create a truthful alternate space where you as a visitor will walk alongside the immigrants and into their minds with infinite possibilities and perspectives within a vast landscape, but you will go on your own terms. It is hailed by critics as a new form of immersion that will take film to new levels of experience. And the result is an extraordinary verisimilitude, an amazing experience, as the results give this idea of living through a virtual world. The same year in Boulder, I signed up to take the 1-year immersive tour called Forced from Home, which is sponsored by the Doctors Without Borders, complete with virtual reality videos, props, 360-degree perspectives on the lives of undocumented immigrants and migrants. The experience shows us what it's like to live and feel as a migrant. We see what they carry, how they live in detention and migrant centers, what they eat, and how they cope with the harsh realities of living undocumented day to day. I take the 1-hour tour with my predominantly white students in my Latinx studies class, an extra credit assignment. 3 undergrads attend. We go to Starbucks after the tour to talk about what we felt, what we experienced. I sit and listen to my students talk about the pain they felt. It was so real, one says. I feel so bad for them, another chimes in. I smile and understand their guilt and continue to sip my espresso as I look at the long line of white Boulderites standing to get in the exhibit situated in the middle of Pearl Street. I feel it too. This is, do you have time for a little bit more, Frederick? Okay, phantom limbs. What happens when your body becomes a ghost? A specter that chews on nerves that only your mind can see and feel. Explaining phantom limb pain is like documenting a ghost without a camera. There is never enough light, the image always blurred, so everyone doubts your vision. Phantom limbs dwell in my father's father,
Narciso Shorty Rivera, who had his thumb amputated when he was a young man. Some say a rice mill accident caused an infection that turned it gangrene in 1947, and they had to cut off his thumb so the gangrene would not spread. He never told us exactly how it happened, only that it hurt for years after it was gone. Do you miss having a thumb? I would ask him as a young boy. Only when it hurts, he would say with a smile. Exactly 100 years before my grandfather lost his thumb, General Santa Anna lost his prosthetic leg during the US-Mexico War in 1847, the year before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was inscribed and would cut the body politic of Mexico into pieces, creating phantom limbs for millions of Mexicans for generations. I wonder if Santa Anna still feels the pain of losing his leg, of losing the war. Millions of undocumented Mexicans still feel the pain in their prosthetic bodies. And I'll just end with the conclusion of the book, if that's okay. Will I be granted an afterlife? I asked this question while sitting in the archives of the Laurentian Library, the library Michelangelo designed, and where, like me, George Bataille would read the Florentine Codex. My second time here, I'm finally allowed to see the last book, The Conquest, and think about the end days of my ancestors. Were they given an afterlife? Will I see the people that I have been studying for so long in this afterlife? Sahagún prayed to God that his codex would grant him the privilege of an afterlife after documenting the Mexica people whom his own culture would help destroy. My mind traces the path of the Florentine Codex took to Italy from Mexico, and I am taking from this monument to the Enlightenment, to the Mesoamerican ruins of the goddess Ixchel in Mexico on the Isla Mujeres, by a 1,000-year-old stone structure crumbling 13 miles from the resorts that litter the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. I show my passport to a government official before I enter the ruins and am given a wristband that must be worn at all times under the risk of prosecution or deportation. The wristband's number corresponds with the number on my passport document to ensure that I do not loot the ruins. Like many times before me, however, I enter the ruins only to take the document off my wrist and tie it to the altar of Ixchel, a sacrifice for my eternity. Meditating at the edge of Mexico's haunted Mesoamerican past while peering into a fathomless gulf, I am undocumented for one fleeting moment. I close my eyes and imagine myself walking off the page. Thank you.
Wow, really powerful. Breathing light into the archives,
Excuse me.
hemispheric and global archives, but also bringing to light the forced ephemera of the undocumented document. Tell us, John-Michael, what inspired you to create across forms, styles, media even?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I mean, well, part of it became, that I was studying Diderot, the preliminary discourse of Diderot, which is, the first one of the big Enlightenment encyclopedias, and as well as the Florentine Codex. And I found it really interesting that these kind of early documents of the New World, if you will, and the Enlightenment, were absolutely preoccupied with poetics and multiple forms, right? So much so where Diderot spends time talking about poetry as he's talking about knowledge, right? And so in many ways, I guess the project, because it was trying to engage the Florentine Codex, which is 3 scholia. There's like 3 rows. There's tons of beautiful images. There's very descriptive language of things, but also very flowery things. But part of it, because there's 15 people that are that take part in creating the codex. It's not just Sahagún. Sahagún's kind of the compiler, if you will, right? So what I wanted to do is kind of, how can I create kind of a polyvocal, multi-genre form that deals with the complexities of documentality and undocumentality over time. And so that's why I kind of started, playing with this. And so it would be, I would find and recover a particular archive that, because each like little mini chapter has an archive or a picture in it as well, which then kind of, this is going to sound really hokey, and please forgive me, but it kind of spoke to me of the way I wanted to engage it. Right. Some forms felt that they needed to be more poetic, other forms more straightforward. There's fiction in here as well. There's, nonfiction, multiple ways to engage it, but also kind of, I'm also kind of, theoretically calling into question the idea of what documents do.
John-Michael, I'm going to ask just a few more questions and then we'll turn it over to our audience. But what for you was a seemingly insurmountable challenge that you managed to overcome in the process of creating Undocumented?
Being an administrator? No. But besides that, no. I'll be honest with you. When I first looked at the Florentine Codex, when I started engaging it at first, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And this is kind of that problem you have when you first Frederick, this, when you first see an archive and it's alien to you, right? And so it's really hard to kind of engage it. And so that took a long time. It's written in 3 different languages. It's very hard to access. And so that took some time. And then the other one was also finding, I guess you can say, the courage to write a multi-genre piece, right? And the courage wasn't, found within myself. Honestly, it was found from colleagues of mine, from Julie Carr, from Vincent Woodard, from I can just go on, who really supported me early on in the project and how I thought about it. And this book also began, I think I read those poems for y'all. It's important to note that that's how the book began at first, is kind of these segment poems that I sent to Roberto Tejada, who he published them, and in a folio, and it was him who said, "Hey, you have something here. You need to really sit down and work on this," because I was going to start doing some other projects. He said, "No, you need to work on this." And then speaking with my colleagues and friends, and then kind of just trying to find, how do you, I guess you can say, how do you rein in a polyvocal project, right? That based upon archives that are incredibly difficult to engage. That was the real challenge, and why it took so many years to come together. Because it began in 2012, really, right? Even before that, to be honest.
Two final questions from me, and then I'm going to turn it over. There is this sense, we know, in our communities, of a forced permanent state of temporariness, a forced permanent state of temporariness that disallows kind of the breathing moment for what people call like wellness. And I just wondered, how might Undocumented speak to these issues?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good, question. And the reality is, and I actually learned this from my daughter, who did much more work on psychological depressive issues within undocumented populations, right? And that folks that constantly feel unmoored are in a constant state of anxiety, right? So both social pressure, anxiety, but also this is the anxiety of being not tethered to a state, or a state that wants to get rid of you, that wants to deport you, right? And so that it creates a problem for everyone. And then there's the other reality is how all of us how anxiety and depression is just rising tremendously. And this is even before COVID. Now it's off the charts now, right? But part of it is to this world of documentality and undocumentality that's constantly dictating our every lives, our every moment with phones. And what I mean by documents, of course, I mean both the the digitized document as well as the real material document. And the function, the mimetic function, the representational function that documents play, and the way that they just totally engulf your psyche and your body constantly, it just tore me up personally. Right, just kind of the overwhelming information, if you will, the glut, and and waking up in the morning and going to sleep to information constantly, learning to turn yourself off has been very difficult. So yeah.
John-Michael, your classrooms in many ways are kind of laboratory for remixing, recreating, creating across creative and critical borders. Are you modeling for new gen students that which you didn't kind of have, like you were talking about needing the courage in a way to take this step? Is your laboratory, your classroom, a space for allowing this to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'd hope that it is, that students are able to engage that. I actually had a student do amazing work she's going to be doing with documentality, and questions of queer identity, and she's looking at Anzaldúa in ways that I didn't think about as strongly as she is, and so I'm really excited about her work. And there's a number of students doing amazing stuff. But I'll be honest with you, I'm on the folks, if it wasn't for Bill's book, if it wasn't for Gloria Anzaldúa's book, I'd have no, for the other books that you mentioned, I'd have no models of that at all, right? But in the classroom, though, specifically, I do want to, be careful that somehow thinking that every book should be polyvocal, every book should be hybrid, and so forth. That's not necessarily always the case. And I want, students to, really make conscious decisions, and, also young writers also, when they're engaging in these things. For me, the reason why this book was, a hybrid genre book, like I said, because the archive I was engaging was a hybrid archive itself. There was, multiple, voices and so forth, multiple forms. So that's why I ended up, taking this on. I'm not sure if my next book will look exactly like this, though I have to admit, I really do like pushing the boundaries of what a page can look like. And if anything, I want my students to do that. I wanted my students to see each page as a canvas, right? And we don't necessarily have to have that structure, right? I really love, we can kind of look at negative space. We can look at, the relationship between image and text, between poetics and nonfiction, between fiction and reality, right? All these things, I like them kind of coming together, because ultimately I think they allow for a richer engagement with not only your archive, but a richer engagement with your reader. Right, which is because I'm trying to there's sections in here, for example, there's this one section where I'm it's the called Hanging Trees, right, where I basically talk about these hanging trees throughout the US, and then what I've done here throughout here is I kind of listed. You probably can't see this. Maybe you get the book and you can see it. And all the names of the folks of Latinos who have been hung in trees, and it's just bricked names just running together. And I wanted that overwhelming violence, right, to show this violence on the page, and the overwhelming of it. Page after page, you see these names and these unknown names. Which then gets me into talking about the hanging tree in Pueblo, Colorado. And so, yeah, so, I think there's ways that you can, use the text, use the page that can be just as effective as a thesis statement, right? A little more subtle, right? Teaching students how to be a little more subtle, and showing students how to show rather than tell, right? And which is difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah, so this actually is a nice lead into some of the questions, showing and not telling. Philip Joseph asks, how do you position the poetics of your text in relation to the immersive virtual reality exhibits that you reference? Do you see those VR exhibits as doing the work of erasure or documenting, or a little of both?
Thanks, Phil. That's a great question. I would say a little bit of both, right? And that's kind of the tension that I'm kind of playing with in the book, and how I'm playing with this idea of undocumentality, is that all documents are inevitably built. They're built in a certain type of both inscription and erasure within them, right? And that's the paradox that creates that references I guess you could say that constructs the spectral subject, right? The fact that they're constantly rendering, documents are desiring to reference a particular body, right? Your driver's license, your birth certificate, and so forth. And in many times they become the substitution for the very body in itself, right? And I don't want to get too theoretical on this, but Ferraris and Derrida and Buckland and so forth, they're like, these kind of realist philosophers, and not the post-realist stuff. These are like, these are philosophy departments, right? Where they're specifically looking at, the role that language plays in the inscription of the self. And their whole idea is that social ontology is constructed from documents, period. And I thought that's too easy, right? So yeah, yes, it is. So, documents do construct a social reality, but what does it mean then, when you are an undocumented subject within this kind of documentary culture, right? What does it mean when you're a minoritized subject within this documenting culture? How do documents inscribe those people differently? Or basically, how do some documents literally they inscribe to erase, right? Within laws and so forth. I hope I understood that, but the virtual argument is interesting. The spectral aspect of the film is amazing, and but yeah, so that's a great question.
Yeah, another related question coming from Bill, and I'll just kind of paraphrase it. The kind of irony, right, of advocating. Anyway, that's his word, for the undocumented, while also having you're a well-heeled kind of academic, and he brings up the people of paper as something to reflect on, and just basically, I don't have an answer, but it would be interesting.
I've really struggled with that. And that's a great question, Bill. The reality is, I'm creating this experimental essay that's a long piece that's engaging these really hard political questions, and in many ways I was trying to kind of talk about my culpability within that hypocrisy, if you will, in that section I read for you, possession. Right, where I was trying to kind of argue that I too peddle in the, I guess you can say the possession of the undocumented, right? Now at the same time, I'm also trying to recover. There's a chapter called Sanctuary City in here, or Sanctuary, where I look at a number of sanctuaries and the folks who have been taken care of in the communities and so forth, and are all of our culpability in this kind of desire for us to we want to create these sanctuary spaces for the undocumented, but what we ended up finding out is the undocumented who are in these sanctuaries are our mental health, physical health is deteriorating horribly, right? And I kind of, kind of talk about, what is it about, usually these white liberals or affluent Latinos bringing food to the undocumented in these sanctuary cities. You drop it off, you bring clothes, and then I drive away and go back to my home. Right. And what is it, and it's a horrible, we're all culpable, but I'm especially one, because I have a book literally called The Undocuments. And as you'll see in the book, well, Bill kind of knows more than most because he read it. He blurbed for it. Thank God, he a wonderful blurb for it. I do struggle with it. And again, though, what I hope I didn't do, what I didn't perhaps do well enough at times is, in that idea of showing and telling, I don't go out and specifically say what Bill is asking. I don't give him an answer like I'm telling you. I kind of show it. I'm a little more subtle about it, and I ironize it, if you will. And I hope that's enough, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not.
If I may answer, it is, and I think that the sort of the way that you are so creative in the design, the typographic design, really, like you said, it's not the I voice declaring this position, it's the entirety of the book, in all of the decisions that you make that pay respects in ways that I don't think Iñárritu's VR kind of experience is really about, right? You're doing this sort of, you're paying respects. In a true, right? Yeah.
So can I read? I'm going to read this one. Like there's a hard issue that I kind of deal with in the book, the Mexican mortality paradox. Okay, I'm going to read that to you to kind of get an idea of how I'm trying to kind of deal with this. I'm not, if a lot of y'all haven't heard it, but there is a paradox of the undocumented condition. Mexican Latinx populations live longer than Anglos, and their mortality rate is 25% lower, despite the fact that they have worse health care and do not have access to the same services and diets as documented peoples in the United States. Governments have been studying this for decades, seeing what factors have contributed to this phenomenon. One new theory, proposed after testing the blood and saliva of Latinxes, is that their bodies age more slowly than those of other groups, which reveals why they have a slower epigenetic clock. Studies have not concluded how long Latinx's epigenetic clock will continue to tick more slowly after they have acculturated into the US. They keep studying and studying, exploring their undocumented bodies in hopes of finding the fountain of youth. The Mexicans in my family live long lives, despite the mental illness, autoimmune diseases, and heart disease that plague both sides of the family. Pills and surgeries keep us alive well past the lifespan of average Americans. I was hit with two contributing factors, anxiety and heart disease. I take pills every morning and night to ensure that my heart does not stop and that it stays regulated, and the other one so my mind does not race towards thoughts of my death. And yet, with every pill I take, I'm reminded of my death, as they remind me of what Stephen Cave calls the mortality paradox, the inevitable and impossible understanding of our actual death. The pills keep me alive, and yet every morning and evening when I swallow them, they point my mind toward my inevitable death. My epigenetic clock is regulated by a pill container that marks my moments with small blue boxes: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If I stop taking them, I wonder, how long will it take for me to die? I talked to a therapist about this, and he tells me about the 2 surgeries he is about to have and all the pills he takes. Everyone's body is dying, he tells me. You need to keep your mind in the present. That will keep you healthy and living longer. His ability to deal with his decaying body does not relieve my existential dread. You know that Mexicans have a higher rate of depression and anxiety than any other group in the US, I tell him. I did know that, he said. Let's breathe. So, it's again, I try to present, a difficult topic, which is the Mexican mortality, that is happening with undocumented culture. And then I kind of, deal with the existential crisis that, we're all kind of, dealing with, and putting those in tension with each other, right? And not living one or the other that's better than the other, but rather, what, and also kind of making fun of myself too, right? This existential dread that I've created, within my own bourgeois existence, right? And that becomes kind of ridiculous in certain ways. But at the same time, though, it's something that I can't escape, right?
We have a question from Laura Ann about, is this reading against the grain of the archive, deconstructing, and how much is what Saidiya Hartman calls critical fabulation, a critical or creative way of finding new possibilities?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I would do anything similar to Saidiya Hartman would be a wonderful thing. Her book is outstanding. So yeah, I think, I'm trying to, Laura, I'm trying to, rethink how we engage archives. I'm trying to call attention to the hermeneutic act of archives, and this idea somehow that when you recover an archive, it's trying to come to some sort of a truth, and especially it's important to know for Latinos coming out of the history of archives, or for me, out of the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage Project, Frederick as well, we recover archives specifically for the construction of reconstruction of heritage. Right. So it's like Skip Gates's project as well, right? Where, the archive becomes a way to kind of, it's so connected to a nationhood, identity politics, and so forth. And, I don't think that I could have written this book as that early kid who was trying to recover archives for the Recovery Project, because I fetishized them. I loved them. And I felt that it was like this, I had to create this truth, and I had to package them in such a way that will maintain a certain type of Latino heritage and nationalism that I think I broke that in this book. I really tried to challenge that, and I kind of actually make fun of that. Not make fun of. I call BS on that project, right? Though incredibly important project. I think though, and I think that there's always at times when we need to question how is it we're recovering our archives for the construction of heritage, what archives are not being, stated, and then what are the ways that you can, use archives to talk about, really important contemporary issues that may be uncomfortable to the very community that needs them to be so static. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, one thing that I was just thinking about, JM, on what you were talking about. I mean, there is also this assumption that has always kind of made me a little bit mad, that kind of comes with the deconstructive worldview, that it assumes a steadiness of an archive and a kind of the luxury of deconstructing an archive when communities have, BIPOC communities in this country have for so long been denied that luxury. And so, there is something quite, incredible about, recovery of an archive, even in a traditional sort of sense of that, when we've never had that opportunity. But then there's this other great moment, as we're seeing with Undocuments, where we should also have the freedom and sort of be empowered to, like you said, look at the archive from all of these different kinds of positionalities. Let me end with this final sort of question. What is next for you, John-Michael?
Yes, thank you. so COVID's kind of stopped a lot of things. But there's two projects that I'm working on. One of them is actually from this book that it didn't quite get into the book, except in a proem. And in the beginning of the book, there's a proem where I put Hamlet in conversation with Zoot Suit. Okay, and it starts with this: I watched the play unfold beneath my hands. And of course, it's Ghost, mark me, Hamlet, I will. Ghost, remember me, Hamlet, remember thee, yea, from the table of my memory. And then in bold, I say, I'll wipe away my brain. And then I go to Pachuco in Zoot Suit, eluding all documentation. And so what I'm trying to do in this proem is, and what I'd like to continue to do is, Derrida is obsessed with Hamlet in many ways. If you look at his idea of hondology, his idea of deconstruction, a lot of stuff comes out with him quoting Hamlet through, and it's not just one time. I mean, he constantly returns to Hamlet over and over again. And he does it to talk about, the language and trace and ontology and justice and friendship, and it just constantly refers to it. I want to do that with Zoot Suit. and I basically want to talk about Zoot Suit as a way to explore how the performativity of documents in acts of assemblage. Right, so I'm very interested in seeing how the Sleepy Lagoon murders and acts of violence enact a certain thing, because I think Zoot Suit is very engaged in this idea of what the document can be and its possibility within collectivity. And so I'm trying to look, like I said, kind of, but back again though with me. I'm going to go back to Sleepy Lagoon. I'm going to really engage the particular space. I'm going to get back into the archives of the trial. I've been looking at the transcripts of the trial, really exploring them, what the transcripts are doing. And so I've been kind of, doing some poetry work with the transcripts and then playing with that as well. And then the other, so that's I'm working on that now. And the other work that I'm is a book called 13 Strikes of the Clock. And this work is exploring my own work as slowly trying to become a clockmaker over the years. Frederick knows about this. I was taking classes when you were here, 15 years ago, and then also relating that experience with that happens to have a school here of watch and clockmaking, which is one of the few places in the country. And it's a really interesting space of folks of color, immigrants, because the American Clock Association has these scholarships for folks to do this work, as well as homeless. And then also these, very old white men. And so it's this incredible making space in there. So I'm doing that, and I'm going to kind of weave that story with these folks with the what I call the new American Gothic that is occurring around this idea of the 100-mile border, right? And my daughter kind of turned me on this idea, the 100-mile border. Right now, 2 out of 3 people in the United States live within the 100-mile border zone. And that basically means that the government has the right to search you, to seize you, to be and to call you a combatant in this 100-mile border zone, right? And it was really going on big time in Trump. And I mean by 100-mile border zone, parts of Minnesota are in this because they're using the Great Lakes as this argument, right? And my daughter is doing real work on this. I'm doing like the fun poetic work with it, if you will. And so I'm trying to look at I guess you can say, the ways that temporality is being affected within these 100-mile border zones. So I'm looking at these great clock projects that are occurring within the 100-mile border zone. The Amazon, Jeff Bezos, is it Bezos? Yeah, Bezos, 10,000 year clock, right? As well as the monumental clock in Tijuana There's a great old clock family in Mexico City that I'm going to interview. So kind of, to explore all these issues. And then I'm going to really, at the same time of this, because there's another weaved discussion of, I want to take up questions of geriatrics. What does it mean to age? Right? What does it mean for me to age as I become a clockmaker in this particular time? So I'm gathering kind of all that together. I wrote an intro called Witness Marks, where I kind of talk about Edgar Allan Poe and containment and so I'm just kind of starting to get that together, and that will be in your desk next summer.
Wow. Clockmaker, homo faber, right? Poetics maker, all working to slow to a pause, to wake us to new ways of perceiving, experiencing a slowed space and time. Thank you, JM, for this and for the work that you will be gifting us in the future.
Thank you all, and thank you all for being here. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, and for taking the time. I know Zoom is something that folks don't want to do, and I hope to goodness we'll be able to be together soon. But again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Frederick and John-Michael, for sharing your time with us tonight. Tonight's event could not have happened without the support of my colleagues at the University of Arizona Press and our University of Arizona Libraries family. We hope to see you at our next event on Wednesday, April 7th, Federico, One Man's Remarkable Journey from Tututepec to LA. For more information, please visit our website, uapress.arizona.edu, where you can also purchase tonight's book. Finally, thanks to all of you who've joined us. The best part of publishing books, like Undocumented, is the opportunity to share them with you all. I hope you have a wonderful evening.